There is a filing cabinet in the basement of a building that no longer stands. What survives is a single logbook, spiral-bound, water-stained, written in the careful hand of a man whose only job was to walk the floors after midnight and confirm that nothing was wrong. His name was Raymond Elias Cooke. He worked the night watch at 211 South Wabash Avenue, Chicago, from September 1930 until February 1932. Most of his entries are routine. 41 of them describe something that was not on any building plan he had ever seen. This is what he wrote. October 19th, 1931. 211 South Wabash Avenue, Chicago. Temperature at start of rounds, 44 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind from the northwest. Lobby secured at 6:47 p.m. by Day Superintendent Harold Voss. On at 10 p.m., keys collected from the utility room hook beside the steam gauge. Board signed. My rounds follow the same order every night. 6 down by stairwell to 2, elevator to the sub-basement, boiler room, coal intake, lobby, service entrance locked from inside. The building has 6 occupied floors, offices, a telegraph concern on 3, a garment broker on 5, and 1 sub-basement level marked B on all posted plans. The sub-basement contains 2 boilers, a coal storage room, the electrical panel for floors 1 through 4, and a freight lift out of service since March. Standard rounds run 90 minutes when everything is in order. Everything was in order on October 19th. I record that because it was the last night I can write it without qualification. Before I describe what I have since found, I want to set down what I know about this building and about the ground it stands on, because that knowledge is the only frame I have for what follows. 211 South Wabash was constructed in 1912. The cornerstone on the Wabash side exterior gives that date, and the construction certificate framed in Superintendent Voss's office confirms it. Holbrook and Crane, architects of record, completion May 1913. The building replaced an earlier structure on the same lot. I know this only because I asked Voss about it once, early in my tenure here. He mentioned it without interest, and did not know what the earlier structure had been. Chicago, by 1931, sits on a considerable depth of its own past. The freight tunnel system running beneath the loop, some 60 miles of narrow-gauge electric railway at approximately 40 feet below street level, has been in operation since 1906, according to accounts I have read in the Tribune. It was constructed beginning in 1899 to move coal and freight between buildings without adding to street-level congestion. Several buildings along Wabash connected to the system through their basements. Whether 211 was among them, I did not know when I began these entries. There is another city I have thought about since October. Seattle rebuilt after its fire of 1889 by raising the street grade by as much as 20 feet in some blocks, leaving the original storefronts and sidewalks sealed below the new construction. For a time, people used those underground spaces as they always had. Eventually, the entrances were closed. The spaces remained. I thought of Seattle the first time the elevator took me below the sub-basement level, but I am recording events in the order they occurred. October 23rd, 1931. Temperature at start of rounds, 39 degrees, adding this entry 4 days after the fact. On the night of the 23rd, I completed my standard rounds through floors 6 to 2 without incident. At 11:48 p.m., I entered the elevator to descend to B. The elevator at 211 is an Otis hydraulic unit installed with the building in 1912. The interior panel has 7 buttons, floors 1 through 6 and 1 marked B in stamped brass. I have pressed B every working night since September of last year. On the night of October 23rd, I noticed a button below B. It is not labelled. It is brass, same as the others, recessed into the same bakelite panel. It sits approximately 1 inch below B, which sits at the bottom of the column. The spacing between it and B is consistent with the spacing between the other buttons. It is not new. The brass is worn at the centre in the same pattern as B and the upper floor buttons, worn from repeated contact, not from age alone. I have no explanation for why I had not noticed it before October 23rd. I did not press it. I descended to B, completed my boiler room check, confirmed the coal intake was sealed, and returned to the lobby. I noted the button in the margin of my log sheet for that night. I did not report it to Voss. I wanted to look at it again first. October 26th, 1931. Temperature 36 degrees. The button is still there. I examined it for 4 minutes before descending to B. The wear pattern is old and consistent. I pressed each labelled button in sequence to confirm normal panel response. The unlabeled button I did not press. October 28th, 1931, 12:14 a.m. The coal corridor door was open. The coal corridor is a secondary passage off the main sub-basement hallway, running approximately 15 feet from the B-level elevator landing toward the north foundation wall. The door is steel, painted grey, stenciled coal, no entry and black. It has been locked on every previous check since I began here. I have no key for it on my ring. When I asked Voss about it during my first week, he said it was a decommissioned intake passage, key held by the building engineer Szymanski, who comes in twice weekly. On the night of October 28th, the door was open, not ajar. Fully open, swung back against the passage wall. The latch had not been forced. The mechanism was intact. No footprints in the coal dust on the passage floor. No disturbance to the grime on the door's inner face. The passage beyond was dark. My flashlight reached approximately 8 feet into it before the beam thinned. I did not enter. I noted the time and the condition of the door, pulled it shut, confirmed the latch caught, and completed my rounds. I have since checked the coal corridor door on every subsequent round. It is locked on every check conducted before midnight. On October 30th, I remained in the sub-basement past 12 specifically to observe it. At 12:09 a.m., the latch mechanism moved. The door swung open. I stood at the entrance with my flashlight for 11 minutes. There was no draft. No sound from within. No mechanical basis I could identify for the door to open on a timer or in response to temperature change. I'm recording this because it is what I observed, and because a watchman's log is only useful if it contains what actually happened. November 1st, 1931. Temperature at start of rounds, 33 degrees. I pressed the unlabeled button at 11:53 p.m. I had been noting conditions in this building for 9 days without acting on them. A button worn smooth from use. A door that opens after midnight without a key. A watchman's function is to identify conditions that are not as they should be. I had been doing the opposite, observing and recording and returning to the lobby. That is not procedure. I pressed the button. The elevator descended. From the B-level landing to wherever the doors opened, the descent took approximately 8 seconds longer than the descent from the lobby to B. At the standard hydraulic speed of this unit, 8 seconds represents a vertical drop of 12 to 14 additional feet below the sub-basement. I know this elevator's timing the way I know my own rounds. What I felt was not a mechanical fault. It was a controlled descent to a level this building does not officially contain. The doors opened onto a corridor. It was not on the 1913 plan posted in the utility room, a single-page blueprint showing the B-level as a rectangular space, 60 feet north to south and 40 feet east to west, containing the boiler alcove, coal storage, the electrical panel housing, and the freight lift shaft. The corridor I stepped into ran north from the elevator landing and appeared on none of it. The ceiling was lower than the sub-basement above, 8 feet against 12. The walls were exposed brick, not the poured concrete of the 1912 construction. The mortar was a darker grey tending toward brown, and the brick itself ran a slightly narrower gauge than the standard I was accustomed to. I am not a mason. I record what I observed. I walked north and counted paces. At 40 paces I reached a junction, a cross corridor running east and west, both directions disappearing beyond my flashlight's range. I stood at the junction for approximately 2 minutes and listened. I heard the building above me, steam pipes in their slow percussion, the low vibration of Wabash Avenue traffic that never fully stops, the contraction of metal in the cold. I heard nothing from the corridors around me. I turned east. At 9 paces I found the coal room. The door was wooden, plank construction with a cast-iron latch, the kind of hardware common in buildings that went up fast after the 1871 fire, built to function rather than to last. It was not locked. Inside, a coal bin ran the full length of the north wall, approximately 12 feet. The bin was full, not partially full to within a hand's width of the lip, with a thin surface dust suggesting the coal had not been disturbed recently, but had been loaded within the last several years. Coal left untouched for a decade accumulates a heavier deposit than what I found here. This coal had been stored, not abandoned. The building above, the 1912 building, does not need this coal. Its boilers are fed from the intake on the north wall of the B-level sub-basement, via a chute connected to the alley-side delivery port on Wabash. I have watched that delivery twice. A truck, a chute, a bin that holds perhaps a ton. What was in the bin below the sub-basement was more than twice that quantity, in a room that does not exist on any plan. I returned to the junction and continued west. At 31 paces I found the second boiler room. The boilers on the B level are a matched pair of Kiwani units, cast iron sectional, installed in 1913 according to the placard on the near unit. They are correctly sized for a 6-story office building. I know them. The boiler in the room below was not a Kiwani. It was a single horizontal fire tube unit, considerably larger in diameter than either of the units above, with a firebox door facing east and a flue collar at the west end disappearing into the brick wall. The unit was cold. I touched the jacket and felt no residual warmth. On the front plate, between the pressure gauge housing and the firebox door handle, was a manufacturer's medallion. I brought my flashlight to within 6 inches of it. The manufacturer was the Prescott Steam Appliance Company of Cleveland, Ohio. Below the name was a production date. The date was 1887. The building above was constructed in 1912. The cornerstone says 1912. The construction certificate in Voss's office says 1912. I am standing in front of a boiler manufactured 25 years before this building existed. The reasonable explanation is that the 1912 structure was built over an existing one. That Holbrook and Crane erected their 6-story building above a predecessor, sealed the lower level, and connected only what they needed to connect. Buildings are built on top of things. Chicago has been rebuilding itself since 1871, and every layer leaves a remnant beneath the next. That is the reasonable explanation. It accounts for the coal, the boiler, the lower ceiling, the older brick. It does not account for an elevator button worn to smoothness from regular use, or a coal bin that is full rather than decommissioned, or a corridor door that unlocks itself after midnight. Reasonable explanations reach only as far as the evidence that supports them. I surfaced. Completed standard rounds. Wrote this entry at 3:40 a.m. by the light of the lobby desk lamp. I did not report to Voss. November 3rd, 1931. Temperature 31 degrees, second descent. I brought a larger flashlight from the utility room cabinet and a separate notepad. I went directly to the junction and continued west past the boiler room to the end of the corridor. The western terminus was a brick wall with a single wooden door set into it. Above the lintel, painted in black in a lettering style consistent with institutional signage of the previous century, the paint old and flaking but legible, was a room designation. It read, Watchman, Records. The door was unlocked. Inside, a roll-top desk, timbre closed and latched, a wooden chair, a wall hook to the right of the door at the height a man would hang a coat. The hook was empty. On the desk, a brass nameplate in a wooden base, the kind that holds a card. The card was there. The ink had faded past reading except for 3 characters, R, E, and what I believed to be a C, followed by letters I could not recover. I noted the partial name in my separate notepad. In the centre drawer I found a logbook, a bound ledger, cloth cover, marbled green and black, standard office supply for any Chicago commercial building of the 1880s or 1890s. I opened it to the first page. The first entry was dated April 7th, 1891. The last entry I found was dated March 2nd, 1893. The handwriting throughout was careful, upright, consistent. A man who had written the same kind of entry many times. The entries recorded temperatures, door checks, coal levels, boiler pressure readings, and occasional notes on unusual conditions. They were patrol log entries, written by a night watchman, in a room designated for a night watchman, in a building that, according to every record I have access to, did not yet exist. I wrote one question at the top of a fresh page in my separate notepad. Who was watching this building before this building existed? November 5th, 1931. Temperature at start of rounds 29 degrees, third descent. Before I begin my regular rounds, I want to set down the timeline as I understand it, because sequence is the only tool I have left. In October of 1871, fire destroyed a substantial portion of Chicago's built environment. The city rebuilt. By the late 1870s and through the 1880s, the blocks along Wabash and State were filling again with commercial structures, brick and stone, 4 and 5 stories, the ordinary architecture of a Midwestern city growing faster than it could plan itself. The logbook I found below this building begins in April of 1891. It was written in a room designated for a night watchman. The room sits approximately 40 feet below the present street level of Wabash Avenue. The entries describe a building, coal loads, boiler pressures, door checks, temperature at 2-hour intervals, that was operating as a functioning commercial structure in 1891 and 1892. In 1899, construction began on the Chicago Freight Tunnel system. By 1906 it was operational. 60 miles of narrow-gauge electric railway running 40 feet below the loop streets, connecting to the basements of major buildings to move coal and freight without surface congestion. The corridor I have been walking, its orientation, its depth, its brick construction consistent with the late 1880s, occupies the same layer of the city as that system. It is not a freight tunnel, the gauge is wrong, and the construction is earlier. But it is the same 40 feet down, the same buried stratum of a city that kept building upward and sealed what it left behind. The current structure at 211 South Wabash was erected in 1912. When Holbrook and Crane built their 6-story office block, they built it over what was already there. They connected the elevator to the level below, somehow at some point, and left a button on the panel worn to smoothness by whoever used it before the 1912 building existed. They did not seal the coal corridor door completely. They left the logbook in the drawer. They left the coal in the bin. They left the boiler cold in its room with its 1887 stamp facing the door. This is not a basement. It is a floor. A building stood on this lot before 1912. It had a watchman. The watchman kept a log. The entries ran from April 1891 to March 1893, in a careful hand that recorded the same rounds I walk now, 40 feet above where he walked them. The ink on the nameplate has faded past reading except for 3 letters, R, E, and what I am now confident is a C. I have thought about those letters. I have not written my conclusion in this log. I'm recording that I have a conclusion, not what it is. On the night of November 5th, I returned to the watchman's room and read further in the 1891 logbook. I wanted to know whether his entries changed as mine have changed, whether at some point the routine entries gave way to something else, some discovery he made in the level below his own. I read for 40 minutes by flashlight. His entries did not change. They remained procedural throughout, to the last entry in March of 1893. Either he found nothing unusual, or he did not write it down, or the logbook in the drawer is not the last one he kept. Before I left the room, I looked again at the wall hook beside the door. One hook, cast iron, mounted at shoulder height. The kind of a hook a watchman hangs his coat on during the hours between rounds. It was empty. It has been empty every time I have entered this room. I note it because it is what I saw, and because a log that omits what the watchman saw is not a log. November 14th, 1931. Temperature at start of rounds 26 degrees. Formal notation for the attention of Superintendent Voss, or any subsequent building management personnel reviewing these records. During rounds conducted between October 23rd and November 5th of this year, I observed and investigated the following conditions at 211 South Wabash Avenue. First, an unlabeled button on the elevator panel below the marked sub-basement button showing wear consistent with prolonged regular use. Second, a sub-basement corridor door opening without mechanical cause after midnight on multiple observed occasions, for which no key on my ring and no mechanism I could identify accounts. Third, an elevator descent initiated by the unlabeled button to a level approximately 12 to 14 feet below the marked sub-basement, into a corridor and series of rooms not shown on the 1913 building plan posted in the utility room. Fourth, within that lower level, a coal storage room containing a substantial quantity of coal in apparent recent storage condition. A fire tube boiler manufactured by the Prescott Steam Appliance Company of Cleveland, Ohio, in 1887, and a room designated for a night watchman containing a desk, a wooden chair, a wall hook, and a patrol logbook with entries dated April 1891 through March 1893. I recommend the elevator panel be examined by a qualified mechanic and the unlabeled button assessed for deactivation. I recommend the coal corridor door mechanism be inspected by the building engineer. I recommend Superintendent Voss or a designated representative descend to the lower level and assess the coal stores in the 1887 boiler unit for fire or structural hazard to the building above. I do not recommend the watchman's room or its contents be disturbed, I have no procedural basis for that recommendation. I include it because it is what I think. December 9th, 1931. Temperature at start of rounds, 22 degrees. Lobby secured at 6:51 p.m. by Superintendent Voss. On at 10 p.m, keys collected. Board signed. Rounds completed without incident. Floors 6 through 2. All doors secured. Windows latched. No smoke or heat anomalies noted. Sub-basement. Boilers within standard pressure range. Coal bin at approximately 40% capacity. Electrical panel showing no fault indicators. Coal corridor door locked. Freight lift out of service. Lobby secure. Wabash side service entrance locked from inside at 3:12 a.m. No anomalies noted. The elevator panel contains 7 buttons. I have not pressed the unlabeled button since November 5th, completing my sub-basement check at 1:47 a.m. I rode the elevator from B to the lobby. Before the doors opened, I stood for a moment looking at the panel. The button was there. I pressed B. The doors opened on the lobby. I extinguished the desk lamp at 3:20 a.m. The logbook was recovered from building maintenance records during renovation of 211 South Wabash Avenue in October 1967. It was found behind a steam pipe in the second-floor utility corridor inside a canvas envelope. The name on the envelope, confirmed against the building's employment records for 1930 through 1932, was Raymond Elias Cooke. The maintenance crew filed it with the building's administrative documents. The lower level described in Cooke's entries was not found during the 1967 renovation. The elevator, replaced in 1954, had at the time of replacement a panel containing 7 buttons. The replacement panel contained 6. No record of that replacement notes the discrepancy. 211 South Wabash Avenue was demolished in March 1971. The site is now a parking structure. Its foundation extends approximately 40 feet below street level. The construction records filed with the City Permit Archives note no unusual subsurface conditions encountered during excavation. The logbook is the only record. The building above is gone. 40 feet down, the older city remains. It does not require maintenance. It kept itself for 40 years before Cooke found the button, and it has kept itself for 40 years since a maintenance crew filed his log behind a steam pipe and moved on to the next corridor. The city keeps building upward. The floor below holds the weight of it, the same as it always has in the dark, in the cold, waiting for someone to press the button again.